Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can we sit down, take seats, and we'll draw this session together. So we're going to make a start for one of the keynote lectures, and anyone who is a member of any of the Royal Colleges of the British Isles will be well aware about the fact that it is not just what we do in an operating theatre that leads to good outcomes for patients, but there's a whole lot more about being a surgeon. And I think no one has contributed to this more than our next speaker, Ken Walker from Inverness. And Ken, really, it's a pleasure to have you on stage and to talk to us about non-technical skills. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Neil. I see you all sitting at the cabaret tables. I'm not going to sing, but I would like to talk to you about patient safety critical skills in the operating room, but not our technical skills, not what we do with our hands, rather these kind of skills here. And through the talk, there'll be quite a lot of references and some QR codes to link you to resources and things. So you might like to have your phone cameras at the ready. Imagine if there were a validated, cost-effective drug or device that could reliably make surgery safer. I mean, you would never operate without it, would you? Well, it turns out that team training in non-technical skills correlates reliably with improved outcomes in several studies and has been doing so for more than a decade. In this study by Karen Mazzocco and team in San Diego, they looked at something, they observed something called the behavioral marker risk index. And when teams in their study exhibited infrequent team behaviors, patients in follow-up were more likely to experience death or major complications, even after correcting for ASA grade. And it's for this kind of reason that CRICO, who is the main medical defense insurer in Boston, gives their surgical members free team training and simulation. And not only that, when they complete it, they give them 10% off their annual subscription, which in America is huge. So their actuaries have told them that that's worth doing. Now, the conversation around non-technical skills is, of course, rooted in patient safety. Its profile was raised by this to Ares Human Report in 1999 from the Institutes of Medicine in the US. And there has been a lot of change since then, but you can still see quite thorough reports in 2020 called things like still not safe. And I think we can safely say that in 2022, to err is still human, even with robotic arms. So let's just have a think. Can we get a sense of scale? What's the size of our problem here? How common are adverse events? What proportion might be preventable? So this is a large systematic review from Imperial. They looked at 14 papers across 8 countries, more than 16,000 inpatient events. So if you're a general surgery inpatient, your chance of having some form of adverse event is 14%. And about half of those might be preventable. Now, of course, the majority of those might be minor. It might be an infected cannula site. But there is a proportion, 4% according to these data, which are fatal. Now, 4% of 7% is not a big risk. It's less than 0.5%. But when you think of the denominator, there are an awful lot of general surgery inpatient episodes. That could translate to a huge number of deaths. And interestingly, in root cause analysis, 80% of these were deemed to be due to a failure not of technical skills, but of non-technical skills, situation awareness, decision-making, communication, teamwork. And that resonates with the experience in other safety-critical industries. Now, in the US, medical error is not included in death certificates. But the authors of this study took data like we've just seen and tried to extrapolate and predict where it might sit in a ranked order of causes of death if it were. And the answer is it might sit third after heart disease, cancer, and before COPD, suicide, motor vehicles, at 250,000 deaths a year. Now, that's a very startling statistic, and you could actually take issue with the handling of statistics in this paper. One could debate how many of these deaths can truly be deemed preventable when we're talking about complex systems and humans looking after humans in complex systems. But even if that figure is massaged a little bit, it's going to be an arresting figure, and it's going to beg the question, if 80% of such adverse outcomes have non-technical skills failures at their root, why are we not routinely training in non-technical skills? And that was the very question asked by Martin Bromley. I don't know if many of you are familiar with his video. You can look up on YouTube, Just a Routine Operation. Over a decade ago, Martin's wife, Elaine, died during a routine ENT operation. It was on induction in a situation of can't intubate, can't ventilate. And she was in the care of a very experienced team who somehow found themselves cognitively frozen. They appeared to be calm in a crisis, but somehow were not able to do the needful. And ironically, Martin is a pilot with an interest in human factors, and he subsequently set up the Clinical Human Factors Group, who've worked with our college. Now, what about us? Do we care about this? Or are we passive? Are we just passive because, unlike the pilots, we don't climb onto the airplane or the operating table with the passenger or patient? Well, although actually, probably we will climb onto an operating table at some point in our lives. Well, the answer is no, we are not. We do care. And Kevin Turner from Bournemouth has published some really interesting survey data amongst UK surgeons. And in the majority of respondents, anxiety and loss of sleep over complications affects the majority of respondents. So it's true that when we walk that walk alongside patients after complications or families after deaths, as we must surely do, of course, the patient comes first and their hardship will be more than ours. But the evidence is that we do sort of accumulate so-called moral injuries, and we can struggle with that walk. And interestingly, that can be the case whether there was identifiable error and blame or not. This is with the Royal College of Surgeons of England. Kevin has produced a useful guide on supporting surgeons after adverse events. Now, of course, our own non-technical skills are only one part of human factors science. Just a word about definitions here. You'll probably be familiar with this James Reason's Swiss cheese model. We have these layers of defense, preventing failures from becoming harm. And each of these layers will have holes in them. And if the holes line up, then, of course, we're in trouble. And then when that happens, it often feels like it was all down to our own layer. There are these other layers in human factors science: the organizational reliability, the ergonomics, the environment, the procedures, and of course we are collectively responsible for those as well. But for the purposes of this talk and in our one-day non-technical skills masterclasses that we do in the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, we're going to concentrate on the non-technical skills of the individuals and teams. Just some more definitions. It's important to have safety one thinking and safety two thinking. Safety one thinking is about asking what goes wrong. We do quite a lot of that in M&M meetings, significant adverse event reviews. I would encourage you to do it deeply. Here's a tool, asking the 5 whys. If you ask why something happened once or twice, you'll usually reach the conclusion it was somebody's fault. Let's take an extreme example. So let's suppose we set a patient on fire, which is a never event, and we might ask, okay, why did we set the patient on fire? Well, we didn't leave the alcohol prep to dry before we used the diathermy near the skin. Okay, why didn't we leave the alcohol prep to dry? Well, it was her job to tell me we'd done the final check and we're okay to go. Okay, why didn't she tell you? Oh, well, there was, and might get another perspective, well, there was an atmosphere of rush in the theatre. Okay, why was there an atmosphere of rush in the theatre? Well, we'd had a late start at the brief, and there was tension in the brief, and nobody wanted to rock the boat. Okay, now we're starting to get somewhere towards the root causes. So I would encourage you, sensitively and intelligently, to use 5 whys rather than 2. And it's important, of course, in our meetings to have safety 2 thinking as well about all the things that go right in our incredibly complex systems. And of course, it's not all about catastrophic error or death. In these interesting studies in cardiac and orthopedic operations, there were a lot of minor failures observed in successful operations. And if there was a culmination into a major failure, this was often preceded by a series of minor failures, more than usual. And so there's obviously a kind of a slide from minor to major failures, and obviously capture and recovery of minor failures must be key here. So what are the key non-technical skills that we're talking about? Well, in the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, we use this NOTS skills taxonomy, a taxonomy being a system, a categorization. It's attributable to Professor Steve Yule here, who's now Professor of Behavioral Science and Surgery in Edinburgh. And it was while he was in Aberdeen that he developed this along with Rona Flynn and others. Using cognitive analysis of real cases, using the literature and so on. And it seems that these are the essential skills in these categories. And you'll see that there are 2 cognitive categories, situation awareness and decision making, and 2 social psychology categories, communication and teamwork and leadership. These are the cognitive and social skills which underpin optimal surgical performance. And this is about optimizing. This is not about dealing with bad performers. It's about dealing with good performers who want to be better. Now, we won't have time just now to drill into each of these categories like we would in an all-day NOTS masterclass, like the ones we run through the college. But let me just dip in and give you a flavor of each. And obviously, situation awareness is absolutely fundamental. You probably know that already. And you probably know that your brains are very good at it. So I'd like you to look at the picture, please. You'll be particularly good at it when you're not either overstressed or understressed, as hopefully at the moment you are. And tell me what you notice. I'm hearing the football already. Usually people notice the football in this picture, perhaps because it's photoshopped, but perhaps because, and most people say it because it shouldn't be there. And then people say, and there might be a child coming behind it. And so you've just demonstrated in about 2 seconds that your brain has very successfully done this 3-stage situation awareness model of Mika Ensley, the famous occupational psychologist. You've perceived the football, you've comprehended that it shouldn't be there, and you've projected forwards that there might be a child coming, you better slow down. And that underpins your decision-making to slow down. And that's a really useful model, not just because you can use it as a tool to save you from error, which I'll come to in a minute, but also because in healthcare and in root cause analyses, there are traps and biases that come up again and again and again, and some of them are particularly common. In failure to perceive, often under stress, our hearing may go. We have a lot of distraction in our surgical day, never mind just in the operating room. We have a lot of fixation. After all, colorectal surgeons, our job is to get deeper and deeper into the pelvis until we are fixated on it. So, and in comprehension, we often have a lot of sunken investment in a plan for a patient, and we can be subject to confirmation bias. We can only see things that might fit our plan rather than things that deviate from it. And similarly, in projecting forward, we might have issues in the team with expecting the most senior person to be mainly doing that rather than everyone. And of course, all of these are more likely in certain situations, many of which are obvious. You know this. I don't know if you know what HALT stands for. Anybody come across that before? It stands for hungry, angry, late, and tired. So we teach our trainees and ourselves to be careful when we're hungry, angry, late, and tired. I wonder how many of us have had a patient who's had less thorough care because they've always been at the end of the ward round when we're all hungry, angry, late, and tired. Our brains have a lot of shortcuts, of course, a lot of intuition, and we need them to get through the day. And so we'll often jump to a first interpretation of what we're seeing. Some of you will see a person looking forwards and some a person looking sideways. And when I've pointed that out to you, you can probably see the other interpretation. But it's very hard to shake off the first one, the first assumption, isn't it? And you can't see both at once. And this is a problem in surgery, and this is a classic paper from Wei et al., quite old now. When we look at this Kalos triangle and see these structures, of course, we're going to assume that that's the cystic duct and the cystic artery, but as you all know, even colorectal surgeons, it probably is that, but it could be that, could be that. And if it's that, and we cut here, I can't point, then we're going to get a class 3 bile duct injury, which is the commonest sort, and it usually goes unnoticed at the time of surgery. It's very difficult to shake our first impression, and we can't see two impressions at once. We can only oscillate between them. So obviously that's a point at which in surgery we classically have to slow down and take stock before we make that move of cutting the presumed cystic duct. Now, slowing down when you should, well, Carol Ann Moulton is a HPB surgeon in Toronto and a cognitive psychologist. Her colleagues are her lab rats. And she's described slowing down when you should as the defining feature of a safe, experienced, and good surgeon. Because they'll spend most of the day in routine mode, but they know when to change gear. And that might be because of cue recognition. It might be because their something's not quite right test is very sensitive. Or it might be at planned points, certain points in the operation we're going to slow down and reassess this. And I've told you a lot about pitfalls in situation awareness, but fortunately there are tools like this to save us from these pitfalls. This is a toolkit that we give to our first-year core surgical trainees in Scotland in their induction boot camp. When we're teaching non-technical skills to the trainees, we tend to major on tools with junior trainees. And as we get to more senior trainees and consultants, we tend to major on using it as a behavioral skills framework, a behavioral assessment tool. So the first 5 tools in this toolkit are all about enhancing your situation awareness. HALT, I've mentioned. Scanning and asking means just being in the habit of scanning the room and asking questions when you have the capacity. Slowing down when you should, as Carol Ann Moulton described. And 3-stage situation awareness itself can be used as a tool. So when we've chosen to slow down, we may do it in those 3 stages. It's particularly useful if we're called into someone else's operating theatre, or if we're seeing a patient with a complication on a ward round. Okay, let's gather the information first, and all the information. Then let's check what we comprehend by it, and only then let's project forwards. And the final tool for situation awareness is something called sterile cockpit, which is borrowed from civil aviation. So they know that during flights, the greatest risk is during takeoff, landing, or periods of turbulence or other such interference. So it's during those periods that their rule is we'll have a sterile cockpit. That means the conversation in and out of the cockpit can only be related to the mission. And we started adopting that for times like the low colorectal anastomosis, when we're becoming more and more focused. And what tends to happen in the rest of the room, well, that's when the other chat is going on. And the team appreciate knowing that that's when that rule's needed. You need to remember to switch it off again at the end. Okay, so that's a little bit about situation awareness and the kind of things we might discuss in that section, and I've majored on it. Of course, that underpins good decision-making. And you probably know how you make decisions. You've probably chosen you're making them all day. You might have chosen a car recently, and you'll have done these elements here. You'll have considered your options. You might have taken one for a test drive, brought it back, changed your mind, taken another, and then made a purchase. And that's how you make decisions, isn't it? Well, actually, that's system 2 thinking. That's analytical decision-making. But most of our decisions are, in fact, in system 1, which is much more recognition primed. Yep, seen this before, know what to do. That's how fireground commanders make decisions according to research. There are actually 4 systems, but let's just hang about with the 2 just now. And so if we're spending most of our time in that more rapid decision-making, and obviously slowing down when you should is going to be key. And it's useful in this section, when we look at decision-making, to think about what we need from our memory systems in order for this to work. Because like a computer, we have hard drive, but we also have RAM. So our decisions are made in the working memory part, sometimes known as the cognitive bandwidth. And the problem with that is it's very subject to interference. So if you stress somebody, you immediately shrink their green box, and that's what results in freezing. And it's interesting to think what that feels like if cognitive overload happens to us, but also what it might look like in someone else. So for me, I tend to go quiet. Some other people might start firing off at random. So it's useful to be able to recognize it in your team, and also useful to think, what is the quickest way to shrink the green box of your teammates, or of perhaps everybody in the room? What's the quickest way? Actually, the quickest and handiest way is just a little bit of rudeness, because it makes them ruminate. And not just the recipient, but all the witnesses as well. So a little bit of rudeness. The subtler, the better. Thought you could do that, stupid boy. Green box will shrink. Suddenly they can't do it. Maybe I am a stupid boy. And if you want to read the plentiful evidence around the effects of rudeness in the team, you can go to civilitysaveslives.com. There's plenty of evidence there. Fortunately, a little bit of a tool can expand your green box again, and you can be up and running again. And this is the kind of tool that we use in our second-year core surgical trainee booster camp, we call it. In a course, a simulation devised by my colleague, Alistair Geraghty. And so I'm going to, you can see it there, I'm going to put that team tool into our toolkit as well. Let's just nip back to think about our cognitive bandwidth again, because if we're a novice, then obviously there are a lot of things filling up that bandwidth, that space, yeah? And they're all going to take quite a lot of space for the novice. And they're going to include all sorts of things. Even, I've put there one called unnecessary baggage. I'm going to come back to Carol Ann Moulton again. She's done some fantastic studies on what we are spending our cognitive effort on during cases. And she found there's even some unnecessary stuff there, like image management. So there was a senior fellow in one of our studies said, oh, I knew I should have stopped and consulted here and made a good decision, but I didn't want to appear indecisive in front of all these people because I was supposed to be the senior fellow. That kind of thing. She was worried about what they would think of her. Those things may occupy less space in the expert's bandwidth or cognitive capacity, although I've drawn the whole box a little bit smaller there because it shrinks with age. That's the great news. And obviously, when a crisis comes along, we may or may not have space to deal with it. But fortunately, there are ways to shrink all of these things. And they're probably the things you do and teach already, like reviewing the notes the night before, or mental rehearsal, or using simulation and deliberate practice of the motor skills. Stereo cockpit, the tool I just gave you, could be good. And for the unnecessary baggage, the worrying about what people think, you just adjust culture in your team will sort that one, so that people don't have to worry about what people are thinking about them. So these are things you probably know, but it's useful to think about them in terms of memory system, I think. And that's a powerful part of that section. The next section is, or category rather, is about communication and teamwork. And when we get onto this, everybody, when you ask people what goes wrong, they always say, the first thing they say is, it's communication that goes wrong. And it can go wrong even in teams that work together every Saturday of the football season. So I'm sure you know that, but did you know there's actually a wealth of literature, particularly strong literature, this is just one study, around errors in communication, the types of errors in communication, and where they fall down. And we can spend a bit of time in that in the course. In a one-day masterclass, we would often use real examples from aviation or enacted examples from surgery, like this, and then discuss the communication problems that arose. And by the end of that part of the day, we usually have some more tools to play with, and I'm just going to quickly, we don't have time to give you the whole session, but quickly, graded assertiveness is just some language that we give people in order to very quickly use the kind of polite and effective language that easily gets through to people who are otherwise frozen, easily gets across a power gradient. IS-bar you might know of. It's a good way to do a handover. It stands for Introduction, Situation, Background, Assessment, Recommendation. Actually, we ask our trainees, put the recommendation up front, phone up and say, it's Colin, I'm in the resus room, I think I need you to come down, please, rather than leaving that to the end. Closed loop communication, I'll give you an example. So, John, we're going to need, using a name helps, John, we're going to need an endo-GIA 60 tri-staple. Just say that back. That feels a bit clunky to start with, but the team like it, because in the just saying it back, you confirm the message, and then I can offload that from my green box. And I know I'm going to get the correct instrument. Otherwise, what happens? You get a TIA 80 green, don't you? So that's closed loop communication. And then we move into the teamwork section, and it's a really interesting section. We think about the types of teams we have. We think about what we could learn from other types of teams. And we think about the features of teams that perform well, according to Eduardo Salas, who's the guru in the literature on team training. And the features are strong leadership, shared mental models, clear roles and responsibilities, backup behaviors, and evaluating team performance. And that shared mental models thing is a very important thing, and we spend some time discussing how best to achieve that at the surgical brief and to keep it updated during the day, a shared mental model between the people in the room. So there's a non-technical toolkit, and when we give that to trainees in their boot camp, this is the structure of our induction boot camp, is that there's a progression in technical skills through this series of simulations, but there's also a progression in non-technical skills through these kind of simulations, and you can see them using these tools. We suggest they don't use them all at once, and you can see them applying in the workplace as well, so that's gratifying, and we've published a bit around that if you would like to read further. The last section is leadership. I wish I had time to go into this because it's absolutely fascinating, but we don't. And then by the end of a one-day masterclass, the whole group is always able to use that taxonomy to comment on and debrief and in a whole enacted video scenario like this one. This is an enacted scenario where the case kind of all goes a bit wrong after the surgeon says, "That's the hard part done." So I don't know if you've ever been there. And that's probably how NOTS was designed to be used as a behavioral rating scale, a rating tool. But it's been validated for lots of other uses as well. It's an extremely well-validated tool. I hope I've shown you that we're talking about the cognitive and social skills which underpin optimal surgical performance. I hope I've shown you that it's rooted in human factors science and in cognitive and social psychology. I'd like to debunk just a few myths about what people think this is about. It's not about consultation skills with patients. We have a separate training program in that regard. A lot of people we find call it this is the soft skills, as if it's some kind of charm school. I'm not sure I like that title because I think these skills are quite hard in the sense they can be difficult and they can be life and death. Some people think it's a course you send people on for remediation if they're being bad people. That's not what it's about. It's for people with good skills who want to be better. And it's not about a tick box exercise. But what I would encourage, in closing, I would encourage you please to access some of this understanding about non-technical skills and wider human factors science. You can go to our Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh website and see the resources there. You could book onto one of the one-day masterclasses that I've mentioned, and we're open to new partnerships in Europe, new sites. In our sister colleges around the British Isles, so in the Royal College of Surgeons of England. There's about to be a Human Factors in Surgery conference organised by Peter Brennan, who's done a huge amount of work in this field. Here in Dublin, in the Royal College of Surgeons of Ireland, there's a postgraduate diploma and a master's in human factors in patient safety. There's a similar master's in Edinburgh. There's a website for the Clinical Human Factors Group that I mentioned from Martin Bromley's work. And I'd like to highly recommend this ESCP webinar from a few weeks ago. It features Nicola Erdley, who's speaking next door as we speak. And this is, amongst others, and this is about non-technical skills, particularly in robotic surgery, because there are particular nuances in robotic surgery. And Nicola has made some fantastic videos to help that discussion. There might be simulation-based team training in your institution. Avail yourself of it. You might like to listen to a couple of podcasts. Steve Yule and I have recorded these podcasts where we've interviewed Michael Moneypenny, who's an expert in the art of debriefing, which is an art. And we've interviewed Caroline Moulton, whom I've mentioned a couple of times. You might be interested in those. I wish we had time to show you some of the exciting things that are on the horizon in terms, but I'm probably out of time. But Steve Yule's group in Edinburgh is now working on using data to enhance performance, like is done in sports. It's called surgical sabermetrics. Theodore Grancharov's group, he's now in Stanford, has been developing. He was moved from Toronto to Stanford. He's been developing a surgical black box to aid, to give the data to aid improvement. And in our own group, we're looking at head camera cued recall and debrief to get at surgeons' expertise. That's the direction of travel. But in the meantime, please access these resources and this understanding. Please don't just operate without it. Thank you very much.
Ken, that was absolutely masterful. Thank you very much for a really enlightening talk and something there for everyone. And I think we can all look towards improving our non-technical skills. And thank you for the excellent resources that you've highlighted. I think we are out of time, and it's now time for the coffee break before the later session. So I won't invite any questions, but I'm sure, Ken, you'll be around at coffee, and anyone who wants to ask can come and touch base with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.